better place, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the consent decree process is the result of a federal pattern and practice investigation, and a finding by the federal DOJ that local police departments have engaged in a pattern and practice of unlawful policing. And the consent decrees essentially are a whole interrelated kind of platform of reforms to address those issues, changing policies, procedures, practices, protocols, providing for training, new ways of doing business, really kind of comprehensively across an organization. And one of the primary lessons, I think, for I think the communities in New York can take away, the jurisdictions in New York can take away, is that police departments need to adopt what I generally have referred to as a culture of continuous self-improvement, which is challenging in a government space where there's no external competition, right? A private firm and, that's making widgets, maybe, implicitly or expressly sort of embracing that type of culture of continuous self improvement so it stays ahead of the curve and all of that. And police departments obviously aren't subject to that pressure, but the logic still applies that police departments need to rigorously evaluate what they're doing. And even in instances where they find that there wasn't any gross misconduct or generally speaking, people followed protocols or policy, organizations need to have the curiosity and the commitment to figuring out what it can do better. Sports teams don't just watch the game tapes of the games that they've lost, they also watch the tapes when they've won, on the theory that you can always look at what you did, see and build upon what you did well, and understand opportunities for getting better. And police departments need to have that same ethos rather than what I think is culturally the case in too many police departments, which is a circling of the wagons. It's a risk aversion, and risk aversion in a very specific sense. In terms of never wanting to admit any mistakes, because it may be used against them in a court or the court of public opinion. But I think that police departments can't be afraid of having more information, can't be afraid of more processes internally and externally that evaluate how officers do, how the department is doing. Because ultimately, a radically transparent department is one that has much more confidence of the public, and I think can withstand instances where individual actors maybe make mistakes much better. Along those lines, I currently live in Los Angeles. I relocated from New York about a year ago, and the Los Angeles Police Department is obviously a historically troubled police department. Rodney King in the early 1990s and the ensuing riots and major scandals with respect to officer corruption, and they went through a federal consent decree process of the sort that places like Cleveland and Baltimore had. And it was a long process, and it wasn't always an easy process. It was painful at times, I think, for people within the department. But they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But especially when you look at where they are now versus where they started, I think that one thing that many people, not all, but many people have pointed to is that when problematic instances arise, when there is an officer involved shooting, for example, because there is a greater understanding and awareness that there are processes, protocols in place to rigorously figure out what happened and to try to hold people accountable, there is a different reaction now than there was 20 years ago, say, amongst a certain and critical portion of the community. Simply a better sense that the department may take seriously what's going on and may be more rigorously committed to trying to get to the bottom of what happened and how things could operate differently. And that's a different type of dynamic that I think, again, is engendered by a culture and the implementation of reforms across the board that are geared toward making the police department as committed to continuous self-improvement as possible. And so I think, in short, the consent decree process, there are a lot of different reforms and systems and processes, and setting up an early intervention system and providing training on stop, search, and arrest, and providing supervision training and different protocols for recruitment and hiring. And they're all very important, but ultimately they're all geared toward creating a police department that isn't afraid of critiquing its own performance and getting better as a result.
Now,